As it's now about that time of the year and Halloween ever approaching, or already has depending on when this is uploaded, I thought I'd share the 6 episodes of one of the greatest Cartoon Network shows ever.
Courage, the Cowardly Dog Show!
These are going to be the 6 episodes I found to be the creepiest and scariest and are just perfect to watch to get you into the spookiest of spirits for all of our favorite holiday. If you're somehow not familiar with the premise of the show, it's basically about a couple who live on a farm with their dog Courage.
But creepy stuff happens in nowhere. It's up to Courage to save his new home!
Yeah, the intro pretty much tells you everything you need to know. So this was originally just going to be the 5 episodes, but I couldn't really narrow it down, so we're just going with 6. Now these 6 aren't necessarily ranked, but I think they're all pretty great, and let's begin. We open this episode with Muriel sick and Eustace being the horribly selfish husband that he is. You have to wonder what she ever saw in him. He begrudgingly decides to go out for hamburgers because she's too sick to cook for him. Muriel asks him to bring her back a scone, and her knowing how Eustace is and he'll forget, tells Courage to go with him. And of course Eustace drives right by the bakery.
But, shut it! Gotta get me a hamburger first.
They arrive at a seemingly normal burger joint that just happens to be ran by a pig man named
Jambon! What's your pleasure?
And he appears rather friendly, but danger may be lurking under his veneer of a pleasant burger proprietor. Courage senses something is off with this guy when the only other customer goes to the restroom and doesn't come back, and Jambon takes away his belongings he left behind. Courage's suspicions are fully heightened when he gets his burger and sees the face of the customer from earlier on the meat. The unsettling atmosphere is intensified as we're led to believe that Jambon is serving up delicious burgers of the human meat variety. Courage reluctantly goes to investigate and descends into the basement, and to his horror overhears a conversation between Jambon and his wife discussing a certain grumpy farmer and his dog, and that leads him to believe they're next on the menu. Courage runs back to Eustace to try and warn him, and of course he can't get through to him, and Jambon returns and tells them his wife would like to meet them, and Courage flees back down the stairs and sees a nightmarish silhouette of Jambon's wife munching down on what appears to be human meat. He wisely keeps running away until he makes it back to the farmhouse. And in a great twist, we learn that they aren't a couple of cannibalistic pigs. Well, I guess they wouldn't be cannibalistic pigs unless they were actually eating pigs, but it doesn't matter. It turns out Jambon's wife just likes to sculpt burgers in the likeness of the customers, and no one was killed at all.
I still want to sink my teeth into that cute little dog.
And it's kind of funny that Courage had escaped earlier so that he never actually even found out any of this. Up until the very end, this episode is quite intense and is a great example of how this show can balance pretty legit horror and comedy. And with the premise this horrifying, it's kind of nice that we get a comedically absurd twist. The great balance of horror and comedy is kind of perfect here. And if you're a fan of Jambon, well, he pops up in a few more episodes. Enjoying a nice night in front of the TV until a knock at the door frightens Courage out of his relaxing time on Muriel's lap, we see a decaying corpse of a man introduce himself as
I'm Benton Tarantella. Benton Tarantella? The famous independent movie director?
And of course his appearance doesn't seem to faze any of them except Courage, naturally. Mr. Tarantella wants to use the farmhouse for his next movie, and Eustace isn't interested until he offers a bunch of money.
We ain't interested.
We'll pay tons of cash.
Okay, we're interested.
Which brings up a classic trope of the show. Muriel is usually kind and oblivious to whatever is going on with the baddie of the week, and Eustace just doesn't care much unless he thinks he can make a quick buck out of it. Naturally, neither Eustace or Muriel notice when this guy's limbs randomly start falling off, but we know Courage is suspicious. Benton convinces them to be part of this zombie movie he's making. Meanwhile, Courage's investigations lead him to find out that Benton and his dead partner, Errol Van Volkheim, were serial killers that posed as filmmakers to lure their victims. Benton had actually died in prison, and his partner Volkheim was released for good behavior. It eventually died and was buried at the cemetery that is now the farmhouse. Benton is in fact a zombie and is trying to resurrect Volkheim when the planets align, and they're going to eat Muriel. Errol is then resurrected, and Eustace is none the wiser.
Great effects.
And disturbingly enough, they want Eustace filming as they attempt to eat her, but Courage rewrites the script to have them bury themselves, and the day is saved. This episode is awesome. It has a great B-movie zombie plot, and Benton Tarantella and Errol Van Volkheim are a great pair of bickering zombie buds. And Benton's a pretty good friend to do all this to bring back his murdering buddy. This is simply just a fun, classic horror episode. This was one of the first episodes I ever saw as a kid, and rewatching for this reaffirms that this is one of my personal favorites. If there's any episode that feels right at home in October, it's definitely the episode about a zombie making a zombie movie. Now this is an especially iconic one for me, and I think embodies the surreal, absurdist horror and visual style that the show is known for. And this is the episode I remember most when I think about this show. Muriel is excited because she won a sitar contest and gets to perform in New York City at the Radio City Music Hall. That's another thing that's unique about Courage, is the music. And throughout the series we see Muriel playing her sitar, and the show features quite a bit of that throughout, which adds to the hauntingly poetic tone of the show. This already has the makings of a classic fish out of water premise.
This ain't no place for me. I belong in my chair.
And it only gets weirder and better. Almost immediately upon arriving, they meet one of those shady types that like to take advantage of tourists, and he's a cockroach named...
Hey, name's Bushwick, but call me Schwick. Just Schwick. Don't ever call me Bushwick.
He kindly offers to get them into the building earlier, and Eustace is distrusting of him until...
I got hot dogs.
Works for me.
Schwick then leads them to a horrifying dungeon-like room, and of course Muriel and Eustace are none the wiser. Schwick then forces Courage into retrieving a mysterious package or he'll kill Muriel. Thus begins Courage's nightmarish odyssey throughout the mean and bizarre streets of New York City, which leads him to a creepy condemned building with what can only be described as the ultimate children's nightmare fuel. These are some of the most iconic and darkly humorous moments that really make me adore this show. A very familiar-faced cop, suspicious of Courage's antics, follows him, which leads to a chase onto the subway, and Courage runs to the driver's compartment. The conductor sees him with the infamous evil package and bails, so Courage tries to drive the subway train, and of course he inadvertently crashes into the room Muriel, Eustace, and Schwick are staying in.
Courage, you made it back just in time for my performance.
And in a stroke of absurd comedic brilliance, the package turns out just to be a squeegee Schwick wanted to use to wipe the plea for help off the dirty window with, but Courage's misadventures throughout the city damaged it, so feeling betrayed, Schwick is now out for blood, and their chase leads to the stage where the cop already happens to be, and Schwick is apprehended, and Muriel gives her performance and happy ending.
2,000 channels and still nothing to watch.
Well, not for Eustace. This episode had it all for me. The dark humor, some insane imagery, an entertaining, eccentric villain. It's just a great nightmarish tale of life in the big city. Sometimes this show can just throw any old idea at the wall and make it a wonderfully weird, memorable episode. This one is one of my absolute favorites. On another seemingly normal day at the farmhouse, Muriel is doing some sweeping and dust is flying about and bothering Eustace's meal. Muriel explains if only he wasn't so cheap and they just had a vacuum. And of course, with perfect timing, a mysterious vacuum salesman,
Dr. Gerbil, but my friends call me Lulu May.
He asks them a bunch of weird random questions and gives them the vacuum free of charge, but there's always a catch. He then sucks them up with the vacuum and tells Courage that he's free now. As Dr. Gerbil leaves, Courage is in pursuit to rescue Eustace and Muriel from this strange gerbil salesman. Following him to his lair, it's revealed he's basically a mad scientist doing experiments on humans. Courage is making his way to them when he sees what appears to be some of Dr. Gerbil's experimental products on display while the creepiest music plays. After a bit of product testing on Eustace and Muriel, Courage arrives in style like he's one to do. He sucks them up with that same vacuum and it's time to bolt. And Courage, being as crafty as he is, uses some of Dr. Gerbil's experimental products against him and flees on boat, and the chase is on. During this chase, some really haunting music plays as they're reaching a waterfall. Courage uses the vacuum to propel himself away from the waterfall, but Dr. Gerbil isn't so lucky. And then back at the farmhouse, Eustace enjoys a nice meal. This episode had creepy vibes for sure, but I'd say this was one of the more unsettling and kind of disturbing ones, especially with the sort of reverse take on animal testing. And the music really helps create the unsettling atmosphere of this episode that much more effective. You almost feel for Dr. Gerbil. He's just getting revenge for the questionable and maybe unethical practice of animal testing for new products. Sometimes this show will hit you with some real-life darker themes, and this is certainly one you won't forget. Eustace, Muriel, and Courage are returning from a vacation, and they actually go on quite a few vacations throughout this series. And for Eustace being a pretty terrible farmer that can't really grow anything, that's quite an accomplishment. They decide to stop off for the night at Cat's Motel, a very sketchy looking motel by the way.
This looks like a crummy place to end a crummy vacation.
We're then introduced to Katz in his first appearance on the show.
Welcome to the Cat's Motel. I'm Katz.
And he is the most recurring villain of the series. Eustace and Muriel go to their room for the night, but Courage has to stay outside because Katz doesn't like dogs, and you'll get a dose of that in later episodes as well. Eustace and Muriel are getting ready for bed, and Katz goes into a room of really big, horrifying pet spiders, which is when things start to get extra creepy. Katz is being a total pervy creeper spying on the couple, and there are spiders and more spiders. There aren't many things more horrifying than spiders coming out of the faucet while you're bathing. Meanwhile, Courage is trying to escape his leash and the giant spider Katz unleashed upon him so that he could do his usual shtick of saving Muriel. Courage tries to get help to no avail while Muriel is fighting off a spider in the tub. Courage discovers that Katz is going to feed them to his spiders.
Dinner has arrived.
And the sleeping Eustace appears to be next on the menu until Courage saves him and hilariously throws him at Katz.
I wish you hadn't done that.
Courage then flees the scene and enters a room of horrifying mutant-looking spiders preserved in jars, and we soon reach the epic confrontation between Courage and Katz. And in true absurdist fashion, only a show like this would come up with, they play the most intense game of badminton.
A little sport before dying, dear boy.
And after what feels like half the episode, Muriel gets rid of her spider assailant and has had enough. She arrives just in time to stop Katz from spidering Courage to death, and this is one of the rare instances where Courage doesn't actually have to rescue her, and she's kind of the hero of this one. This episode is a stone cold classic for me, and it's got a lot of the great horror tropes: creepy motel, spiders, and I guess you could consider Katz a serial killer. And of the 4 Katz related episodes, this one's definitely the best. There's just something so macabre and eerily wonderful about this sophisticated cat person that feeds patrons of his motel to his pet spiders.
Now you're going to learn why no one ever checks out of the Cat's Motel.
And of course, the #1 most chilling and undeniably the most unforgettable, unsettling episode ever, Freaky Fred. We're introduced to the titular Fred on a bus heading to visit his Aunt Muriel, and we'll see that Fred likes to be
naughty.
And back at the farmhouse, Eustace is attempting to fix the bathroom door and shows his enthusiasm for their future guest.
The freak's a barber, a freaky barber with his own freaky barber shop.
Muriel is excited at his arrival, and of course Courage is a little trepidatious, and like always his instincts are on point. Muriel asks Eustace to bring Fred some towels while he's freshening up in the bathroom, and he just makes Courage do it, and he's shoved in the bathroom with Fred, and the door is stuck from the inside. Eustace, who's always one to seize an opportunity to avoid people, decides to leave to get the needed parts to fix the door, and meanwhile Courage is fearfully trying to stay away from Fred, and we're given his weird history of his compulsion to cut hair. Fred eventually gets a hold of Courage and horrifyingly starts buzzing off his hair, and during this we get more hair-chopping backstory of when he had a barber shop and his naughty urges got the best of him. While all this fairly disturbing stuff is going on, Eustace is taking his sweet time getting the parts to fix the door. All the while, Fred continues his onslaught of Courage's hair, and with nothing but a patch of fur left, Courage sees the insane asylum number on the arm of Fred and calls it, and they eventually come and take Fred away. But he leaves a loving note shaved onto Courage. Yep, and there you have it. It's hard to top this episode on the creepy unsettling meter, and Fred is kinda terrifying, and this episode had weird, unnerving atmosphere from the get-go. The fact that our villain is the narrator speaking in a Dr. Seuss-esque poetic style is pretty chilling.
That's when my tired eyes beheld a doggy dog
Like dog he smelled.
If I had seen this episode as a kid, I probably would have been scarred for life. And these have been my 6 creepiest Courage the Cowardly Dog episodes. Let me know what episodes you guys thought were the creepiest, scariest, or just your favorites, and like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff.